The unwelcoming reception. The evening was perfect. The sun had set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. The city streets were buzzing with the sounds of people heading to dinner, eager for a night out. The couple, Jamal and Lisa, walked hand in hand down the street, their excitement growing with each step. They had been looking forward to this moment for weeks, their anniversary dinner at one of the most popular restaurants in town. The restaurant's glowing sign above the door read Gleam Bistro, and it was known for its elegant ambience and exquisite menu. Tonight, they hoped to create a memory to last a lifetime. When they arrived at the door, Jamal smiled at Lisa, and she smiled back, squeezing his hand. They both took a deep breath, ready to enjoy their evening. As they stepped inside, the doorbell rang, and the cool air from the evening breeze followed them in. The restaurant was beautifully decorated with soft lighting and tasteful artwork on the walls. Elegant tables were set with pristine white linens, and the atmosphere was filled with the quiet hum of happy conversations. They approached the hostess station, where an older man stood, adjusting his tie as he glanced at the reservation book. The couple waited patiently, smiling at him. The man looked up briefly, his eyes scanning them in a way that felt strangely cold. Without offering a greeting, he flipped open the book, eyes quickly scanning the pages. Jamal cleared his throat. "Hi, we have a reservation under Jamal Harris. It's for two." The man glanced up again, his expression stiff. He muttered, scanning the book again, despite clearly seeing Jamal's name already. After a long pause, the man finally nodded. "We don't have any tables available right now," he said in a flat, almost dismissive tone. "You'll need to wait a few minutes." Jamal frowned, glancing around. The restaurant was nearly half empty. There were several tables with only one or two people, and it looked like there was plenty of room. Confused, Jamal asked, "Are you sure? It doesn't look too busy in here." The hostess didn't meet his eyes. "I'm afraid we don't have any available tables at the moment. You can wait over there." He pointed vaguely towards the far corner of the restaurant, where a small seating area by the door was set up for people to wait. Lisa exchanged a puzzled look with Jamal, but didn't say anything. They quietly walked over to the small waiting area and sat down, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The sound of cutlery clinking and laughter from the dining area made it clear that others were being seated with no problem. Jamal, trying to keep his composure, leaned in close to Lisa and whispered, "Something's not right, babe." Lisa nodded but didn't say anything. She could feel the tension in the air too, and her stomach churned. She had hoped this night would be special, just the two of them, enjoying each other's company, but now they were left sitting in a corner, waiting for an explanation that seemed to never come. A few minutes passed, and still no one approached them. The other guests, mostly white, walked in and were immediately shown to their tables. Lisa couldn't help but notice how they were greeted warmly and ushered to their seats with smiles. But Jamal and Lisa, who had been waiting patiently for what felt like an eternity, were still ignored. The quiet hum of conversation in the restaurant was like a reminder of their uncomfortable position. Jamal stood up, his frustration growing. "Excuse me," he said, walking back to the hostess station. "I don't understand. We've been waiting for a while now. Can you tell us how much longer it will be?" The older man looked up at Jamal, this time with a colder, more dismissive look in his eyes. "I told you, no tables are available. You'll have to wait your turn." His tone was final, cutting off any further discussion. Jamal's patience was wearing thin. "Look, we've been waiting for over 20 minutes, he said, his voice steady but firm. "And I'd noticed there are tables open. We made a reservation, and we just want to be seated. We're not here to cause trouble." The man didn't even acknowledge Jamal's words. Instead, he looked over Jamal's shoulder to a group of guests who had just walked in, giving them a bright smile and immediately offering them a table. The contrast couldn't have been more obvious. Jamal felt a sharp pang of injustice, but he kept his voice low. He could feel Lisa's hand tense around his, a silent signal that she was just as uncomfortable as he was. Jamal took a deep breath, trying to keep his cool. "I think we should go, Lisa. This doesn't feel right." But Lisa, her eyes narrowed with a mix of confusion and anger, gently pulled his arm. "No, Jamal, we're not leaving," she said quietly. "This is our night. We've worked hard for this, and we deserve to be treated with respect." Jamal hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They would not leave. Not like this. The couple sat in silence for a few more minutes, watching as the restaurant staff greeted new customers with smiles, seating them quickly. Jamal's frustration boiled, but Lisa remained calm, her eyes fixed on the hostess with a determination that Jamal hadn't seen before. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the man returned to them, still with that cold, unwelcoming expression on his face. "We don't serve people like you here," he said, his words laced with disdain. Jamal and Lisa froze. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything they had ever heard. They weren't sure how to respond. This was worse than they had imagined. The sting of racism was real, and it was clear that the man wasn't going to change his mind. The atmosphere shifted in the restaurant, and the couple knew things were about to change. But how? What would happen next? The injustice of the situation was undeniable, but would anyone stand up for them? The couple's calm response. Jamal and Lisa exchanged a long, knowing glance. They didn't need to speak to understand each other's thoughts. They had both experienced unfair treatment before, but tonight had taken them by surprise. Still, they kept their composure. Instead of leaving, they calmly took a seat in the waiting area, not wanting to give the restaurant owner the satisfaction of driving them away. A few diners nearby noticed the exchange, their glances filled with curiosity. Some had overheard the owner's words, and a few looked away, uncomfortable. But the couple sat quietly, their expressions calm yet determined. Lisa gently placed her hand on Jamal's arm, giving him a reassuring squeeze. Jamal nodded, silently promising her that they would face this together. The seconds ticked by slowly, each one amplifying the tension in the air. Other customers continued to arrive, and were greeted warmly by the owner, who was suddenly all smiles as he led them to tables. Jamal and Lisa couldn't help but notice how he laughed and chatted with them, offering recommendations and compliments, as if he were a completely different person. Lisa shifted in her seat and whispered, "We could just leave, you know. It's not worth it." But Jamal shook his head. "No, we're staying. We came here to celebrate, and we deserve to be treated just like anyone else." His voice was calm but firm, and Lisa could see the determination in his eyes. Minutes passed, and as they waited, other diners continued to glance over. A few whispered among themselves, wondering who this couple was and why they were being treated so differently. Lisa noticed one young couple across the room looking their way, seeming genuinely concerned. She gave them a polite nod, but no one else moved or intervened. Jamal leaned closer to Lisa. "It's strange, isn't it? We're treated like outsiders, yet they don't even know us." Lisa's eyes softened. Maybe they don't need to know us. Maybe it's enough for them to make their own assumptions. Jamal took a deep breath, determined not to let anger take over. He knew that responding calmly was the best way to handle this situation, even if every part of him wanted to speak out. They had worked hard for everything they had, and they wouldn't let this evening be ruined by one person's prejudice. Just then, a server walked by, glancing their way with a hesitant look. Jamal raised his hand, hoping to catch the server's attention, but the server quickly looked away, disappearing into the kitchen. Lisa's eyes followed him, a look of disappointment crossing her face. "No one wants to get involved," she murmured softly, almost as if speaking to herself. But they waited, and as the minutes turned into nearly half an hour, their calm endurance began to attract more attention. A sense of unease settled over the restaurant, the quiet buzz of conversations dipping as people noticed the uncomfortable scene. Some guests seemed restless, perhaps sensing the unfairness but unsure of what to do. Meanwhile, the owner continued to ignore Jamal and Lisa as if they weren't even there. It was clear he thought he could wait them out, that eventually they would just leave. But Jamal and Lisa were not leaving. They had no intention of allowing the owner's cold, dismissive attitude to end their evening. They sat together, silent but resolute, waiting for something to change. Little did they know, their calm resistance was beginning to shift the room's energy. A few guests exchanged glances, as if wondering whether to say something. People were curious now, sensing there was more to this couple than met the eye. Jamal and Lisa, without saying a word, had managed to make the room take notice. And it was only the beginning. The owner's cold refusal. As Jamal and Lisa sat waiting, the tension in the restaurant grew thicker. They had been sitting there for nearly 40 minutes now, and it was becoming impossible for the other diners to ignore. More people were glancing over, some whispering to each other, while others looked away, uncomfortable. The restaurant owner continued to greet new guests warmly, seating them without hesitation. It was as if Jamal and Lisa were invisible to him. Finally, Jamal decided he had waited long enough. He stood up, his patience tested to its limit, and walked back to the hostess stand where the owner was stationed. Lisa watched him, her heart pounding, but she trusted him to handle it with grace. "Excuse me," Jamal said firmly but politely. "We've been waiting for almost an hour now. We have a reservation, and it's clear there are tables open. Can you please seat us?" The owner looked at Jamal with a dismissive smirk, barely disguising his disdain. He didn't even bother to check the reservation list. "I told you, no tables are available," he said in a curt, cold tone. "We're fully booked tonight." Jamal frowned, feeling the sting of the man's obvious prejudice, but he kept his voice steady. "Sir, I don't understand. We made a reservation, just like everyone else here. We've been patient, but this treatment isn't fair. Why are you refusing to seat us?" The owner's expression hardened, and he took a step closer, lowering his voice so only Jamal could hear. "Look, I don't have to explain myself to you. I don't want any trouble here, so I suggest you and your friend leave," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Jamal's hands clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay calm. He knew that reacting with anger would only make things worse, and he didn't want to give this man any satisfaction. "All we're asking for is the same respect you're giving everyone else here. We're not causing any trouble. We just want to enjoy our evening." The owner scoffed, crossing his arms. "Respect," he repeated with a bitter laugh. "People like you coming in here, expecting to be treated like the rest of us. Well, let me tell you, we don't serve people like you here." The words hit Jamal like a punch. There it was, laid bare for everyone to see. He could feel the weight of the man's prejudice, and it stung deeper than he could have imagined. He stood frozen for a moment, shocked by the owner's words, while Lisa watched from their waiting area, her heart aching as she saw the pain in Jamal's eyes. A hush fell over the restaurant. It was clear that a few nearby diners had overheard the exchange, and they looked on with wide eyes, shocked by what they were witnessing. The tension was almost unbearable, and a few people shifted uncomfortably in their seats, whispering to each other. The owner, seeing Jamal's stunned expression, smirked, clearly satisfied with himself. He turned away, as if the conversation was over, as if Jamal and Lisa were no longer worth his time. But Jamal took a deep breath, his resolve returning. He knew that walking away would mean letting this man's hatred win, and he wasn't about to let that happen. Without raising his voice, he spoke calmly but loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. "I see. So you're refusing to seat us just because of the way we look. Thank you for making that clear." Lisa stood up, joining Jamal, and took his hand, her own expression strong and unwavering. Together, they looked back at the owner, showing that they weren't intimidated. Their calm defiance was powerful, and it was starting to make others in the restaurant uncomfortable. A young woman sitting nearby, who had been watching the whole time, exchanged a look with her partner. She seemed unsure at first, but finally spoke up. "Excuse me," she said to the owner, her voice steady, but with a hint of anger. "Why are you treating them this way? They've done nothing wrong." The owner's face reddened, clearly caught off guard. He hadn't expected anyone to challenge him, especially not in front of other guests. He stammered, searching for words, but the woman didn't let him off easily. "They've been waiting here for almost an hour, and you keep seating other people without any problem," she continued, her voice growing louder. "This doesn't seem fair." More guests began murmuring in agreement, nodding and whispering to each other. The owner's confident facade was starting to crack under the weight of their questioning gazes. He hadn't anticipated this kind of reaction. He'd assumed no one would care. But Jamal and Lisa's quiet strength had sparked something in the room. People were beginning to see the injustice and were no longer willing to stay silent. The owner, sensing that he was losing control of the situation, scowled at Jamal and Lisa one last time, his face twisted in anger. "Fine," he spat. "If you're so determined to stay, then I'll find you a table." But now, Jamal and Lisa exchanged a glance, considering whether they wanted to sit at a table offered so begrudgingly. They had made their point, and the restaurant was watching, the truth of the owner's prejudice exposed for all to see. Without a word, the couple looked back at the owner, their decision clear. They were no longer just a quiet couple waiting for a meal. They had become a powerful reminder of resilience and dignity in the face of discrimination. And the owner, standing there with his anger and frustration, was now the one left feeling small. The scene was shifting, and it was clear that the couple's true identity was not about status or fame. It was about their strength, dignity, and the quiet power of refusing to back down. Allies among the diners. The tension in the restaurant was palpable. Jamal and Lisa's calm defiance was causing a ripple effect, drawing quiet support from the other diners. A few tables away, a middle-aged man in a suit glanced over, clearly uncomfortable with the owner's treatment of the couple. He had been a regular customer for years and knew the owner well, but tonight he felt uneasy. The man leaned toward his wife and whispered, "I can't believe he's treating them like this. It's completely out of line." His wife nodded, looking troubled. "We should say something. This isn't right." Nearby, the young couple who had spoken to Jamal and Lisa earlier exchanged determined glances. The woman took a deep breath and raised her voice slightly, addressing the owner directly. "Excuse me, but why are you refusing to serve them? They've been polite and patient. They have a reservation, just like the rest of us." The owner, taken aback by this public challenge, tried to maintain his composure. He forced a strained smile and said, "This is none of your business. I reserve the right to manage my restaurant as I see fit." But the young woman didn't back down. "Actually, it is our business. We're customers too, and we don't want to support a place that treats people unfairly." Her words struck a chord with others in the room. Slowly, more people began nodding, murmuring their agreement. The middle-aged man in the suit, emboldened by the woman's courage, cleared his throat and spoke up. "Owner, I've been a customer here for years, but if this is how you treat people, I don't think I want to eat here anymore." The owner's face reddened as he realized he was losing control of the situation. He looked around the room, seeing the disapproving faces and hearing the whispered comments. His confident stance began to falter. He hadn't anticipated that his actions would provoke such a strong reaction. Jamal and Lisa, meanwhile, sat quietly, observing the growing support around them. Lisa felt a surge of gratitude and relief as she realized they weren't alone in this. These strangers, people they had never met, were standing up for them in a way she hadn't expected. One by one, diners began to show their solidarity. A few got up from their tables and stood near Jamal and Lisa, forming a quiet yet powerful circle of support. The young couple, the middle-aged man and his wife, even a few staff members who had been uncomfortable with the owner's actions, now stood with them, silently refusing to let the owner push Jamal and Lisa out. The owner was visibly rattled. He looked around, desperately trying to regain control of the room. "This is ridiculous," he muttered. "Everyone, please sit down and enjoy your meals. There's no need for this. disruption. But no one moved. The silence was filled with quiet defiance as the diners made it clear that they wouldn't back down. Jamal and Lisa had sparked something powerful, a wave of unity that the owner hadn't foreseen. Finally, the young man from the couple who had first approached Jamal spoke up, his voice steady and clear. "If they aren't welcome here, then maybe none of us should be." The owner's face went pale as he watched more customers rise from their seats, leaving their tables to join the quiet protest. He was now facing not just a single couple but nearly his entire dining room, all standing in solidarity. Realizing he was backed into a corner, the owner's confidence finally cracked. He looked at Jamal and Lisa, his expression a mix of frustration and helplessness. This wasn't the response he had expected when he'd chosen to turn them away. But this was just the beginning of the lesson he was about to learn. The revelation begins. With the room now firmly on their side, Jamal and Lisa exchanged a quiet, grateful smile. They hadn't come here expecting to make a statement, but the support they were receiving gave them strength. The restaurant owner, meanwhile, was visibly shaken, his arrogant demeanor crumbling as he struggled to regain control. "Enough of this," he snapped, trying to sound authoritative, but failing to hide the uncertainty in his voice. "I don't know what you're all trying to prove, but I have a business to run." The young woman who had first spoken up looked him directly in the eye. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she said calmly. "You don't even know who they are, and yet you're treating them like they don't belong." The owner rolled his eyes, scoffing. "I don't care who they are. They're not welcome here, and that's final." A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd, but Jamal stayed calm. He stood up slowly, meeting the owner's gaze with a steady look. "You may not care to know who we are," he began, his voice calm but carrying through the room, "but it might interest you to know why we're here." The diners leaned in, sensing that something important was about to be revealed. The owner crossed his arms, trying to look unimpressed, but a flicker of nervousness crossed his face. Jamal continued, his voice steady. "We chose this restaurant because it's well known. We'd heard about it from friends and thought it would be the perfect place to celebrate a special occasion." He paused, glancing at Lisa, who nodded in encouragement. "I'm actually a regional director for a major restaurant chain. Part of my job is to evaluate and invest in promising businesses." Gasps echoed around the room as the diners began to realize the weight of his words. The owner's eyes widened, and he took an involuntary step back, his expression shifting from dismissive to alarmed. Jamal went on, "We wanted to see if this restaurant might be a good fit for our next investment. But now, I can't say we're impressed with the way customers are treated here." The owner stammered, his face turning pale. "Wait, you're here as an investor." His tone, now filled with regret, was a stark contrast to his earlier arrogance. Lisa joined in, her voice calm but firm. "You assumed things about us without even knowing who we were. But what we've seen here says more about this restaurant than any menu ever could." The diners exchanged looks, murmuring in amazement. The young couple who had first stood up for them smiled, pleased to see the tables turn. Others nodded, whispering words of support. The owner was at a loss for words. His mind raced, trying to salvage the situation, but it was clear the damage had been done. The people he had dismissed and tried to humiliate had turned out to be exactly the kind of guests he should have welcomed. After a moment, he stammered, I'm so sorry. I didn't realize." Jamal raised a hand, silencing him. "You didn't care to realize. But that's the problem, isn't it? You judge people before you even know them. And I can tell you, that's no way to run a business." The room fell silent, every eye on the owner as he stood there, humbled and speechless. Jamal and Lisa's quiet dignity had not only shown the truth about the owner's attitude, but had also set an example for everyone there. Jamal took Lisa's hand, giving her a reassuring smile. "Come on, let's go. We have other options." As they turned to leave, the diners broke into quiet applause, honoring the couple's strength and the lesson they had just delivered. But Jamal and Lisa weren't done yet. The owner would soon discover that this moment was only the beginning of the consequences he would face. A reputation on the line. Jamal and Lisa walked out of the restaurant with their heads held high, but the impact of their visit was just beginning to unfold. Inside, the diners continued talking among themselves, and the once busy restaurant felt eerily quiet as people began to question if they wanted to support a place with such values. Word spread quickly from table to table, each customer piecing together the shocking truth. The owner had just turned away potential investors based on nothing more than prejudice. The owner stood frozen, the gravity of his actions sinking in as he watched customer after customer pay their checks and leave. The young couple who had first defended Jamal and Lisa walked past the owner on their way out, shaking their heads in disappointment. "I don't think we'll be back," the woman said simply, her words hitting him like a cold slap. As the evening wore on, the restaurant grew emptier. The once bustling tables were now vacant, their absence a stark reminder of the consequences of the owner's behavior. But his troubles were far from over. The next morning, Jamal decided to take a quiet stand that would send a powerful message. He shared his experience on social media, writing thoughtfully about how he and Lisa had been judged before anyone even knew their names or intentions. He described the kindness of the diners who had stood up for them, praising their courage. However, he was honest about the owner's behavior and how it represented a deeper problem that still needed to be addressed. The post quickly gained traction, with people sharing it across platforms. Hundreds of comments poured in, expressing outrage at the owner's actions and support for Jamal and Lisa. Many users tagged the restaurant, calling for accountability and vowing to avoid it until they saw a change. Back at the restaurant, the owner's phone began buzzing with notifications. Confused, he checked his messages and found a flood of reviews online, most of them condemning his actions from the previous night. Each review echoed the same sentiment: disappointment, disbelief, and a firm stance against discrimination. The owner tried to do damage control, responding to reviews and claiming it was all a misunderstanding. But his excuses fell flat. People could see through his words, and the truth of his behavior was already clear. Meanwhile, Jamal received messages from other restaurant owners and business leaders, expressing their support and condemning the treatment he had faced. Some even offered him and Lisa complimentary meals as a gesture of kindness, showing that not all businesses held the same narrow-minded views. As the day went on, news outlets picked up the story. Reporters reached out to Jamal, intrigued by his experience and the public's response. Jamal and Lisa, however, didn't seek revenge. Instead, they hoped that sharing their story might spark a change in attitudes and remind others of the importance of treating everyone with respect. Later that day, as the restaurant owner watched his business's reputation spiral, he began to realize that his actions had a cost far beyond that one lost evening. He had underestimated the power of community and the importance of treating every person with dignity, no matter who they appeared to be. A lesson learned. Days passed, and the restaurant, once known for its popularity, struggled as a shadow of its former self. Reservations dwindled, and regular customers stayed away, their support replaced by a silent boycott. The owner, sitting in his now empty dining room, was finally forced to confront the reality of his actions. Driven by desperation and remorse, he reached out to Jamal with an apology, asking for a chance to make things right. His message was hesitant, filled with regret and a recognition of the damage he had caused. "I made a mistake, and I am truly sorry. I realize now how harmful my actions were, not just to my business, but to the community as a whole. I'd like to do whatever I can to set things right." Jamal, surprised by the apology, thought carefully before responding. He discussed it with Lisa, who felt that while forgiveness was possible, the owner needed to show a genuine commitment to change. After some reflection, Jamal agreed to meet with the owner under one condition. He wanted to see meaningful actions, not just words. He suggested that the owner partner with local organizations focused on diversity and inclusivity, attend workshops, and make his restaurant a welcoming place for all. It wasn't an easy path, but it was a necessary one if he wanted to restore his reputation. Determined to rebuild, the owner took Jamal's advice to heart. He began by publicly addressing the incident, acknowledging his actions, and committing to positive change. He held a community event at the restaurant, inviting people from all backgrounds to share a meal and build connections. He reached out to the customers who had stood up for Jamal and Lisa, personally apologizing for the way he had behaved. Over time, the restaurant began to change. It became a place where everyone felt welcome. And the owner, humbled by the experience, transformed into a more compassionate person. Jamal and Lisa, observing from a distance, felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. They hadn't just changed one man's mind. They had helped an entire community see the impact of standing up for what was right. In the end, the story of that night didn't just fade away. It became a reminder to everyone who walked through the restaurant's doors of the power of kindness, respect, and second chances. And for Jamal and Lisa, it was a moment of triumph, proving that dignity and compassion could bring change, one choice at a time.